you, Louis, and thank you all for having me and for inviting me to this talk. I'll be talking today about some sustainable business practices, and that might be a little bit unclear because what I'm going to be talking about might be a little bit different from what is thought of as sustainable business practices. And so to get started, I just want to share a little bit about myself. As Louis said, I'm currently researching at Georgia State University, working on my PhD. I'm looking at sustainability in business. But before that, I did my undergrad at University of West Georgia. I was born and raised here in Atlanta, so I'm very familiar with the city. And but I'm so being invited to the Atlanta Science Tavern talk. I'm not a sort of traditional hard scientist. I'm more of a social scientist. I sort of got along this path in a bit of an unconventional way. So I studied marketing and art at West Georgia. I started to manage a medical device company for almost a decade. And during that time, I did a lot of traveling and volunteered on an aquaponics farm in China for a little while and got very fascinated with innovative agricultural techniques. So aquaponics, urban gardening, vertical farming, stuff like that. And so I thought I would be researching that in my PhD program, different sustainable agricultural practices. As you can see from this this picture right here, I am eating cicadas actually, and so cicadas have been talked about a lot in the news lately, and they are delicious. They're tasty. You fry anything and put salt on it, and it tastes like French fries. So they're very good. I will admit the inside of them is a little bit squishier, so the texture on that can be a little bit challenging, but they were quite good. And so I thought I would be studying insects as insects for agricultural as an agricultural alternative to traditional protein sources. But I went to a conference in Wuhan, China, actually in 2018. And discovered that about almost half of the presentations there were about insects for food waste management. And so I sort of shifted into the food waste side of things. And so what I was wanting to talk about today was sustainability. And when we talk about sustainability, I would imagine that this audience is pretty clear with what sustainability is, but really it's the intersection of people, planet, and profit. So doing things that are good for society, doing things that are good for the environment, as well as the economy, and making sure that the activities that we're doing are done in a way that can be done in the future, and it's not robbing future generations of resources. And so the United Nations developed the Sustainability Development Goals. It's 17 sort of agreed upon goals that are high priorities for society as well as businesses to be mindful of and to be prioritizing in their practices. And so, Louis, I'm not sure if we can do the poll to see, oh, here we go. I'm curious about you all, since I don't know the audience. So I am curious, how familiar are you with the UN Sustainability Development Goals? You know, if this is the first time you're hearing about them, if you know about them, if there are some other sort of, if I missed a category that you fall under, if you could please just describe in the chat your level of familiarity, then that would help me to sort of gauge how I talk about these things, just to cater to you all a little bit more. So, so it looks like a few of you are familiar with them, but are still learning. We've got a first timer on here. Welcome. I hope this doesn't overwhelm you. But so basically these sustainable development goals, you can see here, I'm not going to go through every one of them. Many of them are overlapping. They're very interconnected. Many of these issues overlap with each other, and they have a lot of overlap. And so when we look at activities that we can do either as a society, as on a country level, on a firm level, or as an individual, there are certain things that we can do that can address multiple things at once. And so I was wanting to sort of talk about this, and and how, these are overwhelming. Sustainability and sustainability development goals, they're big issues. Things like no poverty, quality education, gender equality, affordable and clean energy. These are big topics, and they can be really hard to sort of really wrap our heads around because they are so big. And it can, I don't know about you, but it makes me feel overwhelmed in thinking, well, what can I do to really make a difference with this? Because, I'm only one person. It's hard to think about how I can really help to make change in this world to address some of these issues. And so, they're overwhelming. And there are things that we can do on a smaller scale to be able to address these in a way that feels a little bit more feasible and tangible for us to be able to deal with. So I'm trying to advance my slides here. So where do we start? I've just listed some random sort of things here. It's not an exhaustive list, but for businesses to look at how they treat their employees, where we're sourcing our materials through our supply chains, how we're using energy. Are we recycling? How is our packaging impacting the planet? What can we do in terms of offering a percentage of our proceeds to be going to different activities? These, again, this is not an exhaustive list. This is just sort of some examples of things that we can sort of keep in mind and be mindful of. And so what I want to talk about mostly today is what can businesses do, and why I want to talk about food waste is because every business deals with food waste, whether they are a restaurant, whether they are located in an urban setting or a rural setting, whether they're online or in person. Every business deals with food waste because every business has employees. So even if they have employees who are working remotely, their employees are eating. And so there are things that they can do as an organization to be able to talk about, address, or do actions surrounding food waste. And, why are we even talking about food waste? Because a lot of people think, it's natural, it's biodegradable. So is it really that big of a deal? Like, why is it so bad? If it ends up in a landfill, what's the big deal? And the problem is that when it's in a landfill, it doesn't break down the way that it should, because a landfill has anaerobic conditions, which means that things are buried. Anaerobic just means without oxygen. And so things aren't being aerated the way that they should be. Not to mention, food waste is combined with things like paint and furniture and computers and all sorts of other things that are put together in a place and just buried and, out of sight, out of mind. And the problem is that you have a lot of contaminants that are happening. You have a lot of leachate that goes out. Even if a landfill is lined, there is no liner that is 100% leak proof. And so what is happening in a landfill is that carbon dioxide is being emitted, methane gas is being emitted. They're very dangerous greenhouse gases that are increasing climate change. And so when we're talking about food waste, the magnitude of it is really quite large. And a third of the food that is being produced on the globe is being wasted. And that's really a pretty staggering number. And despite all of this food being wasted, still over 800 million people are malnourished every year. And so it's not a matter of production. We are producing enough food on this planet to feed everybody. But the problem is that logistically, it's not getting to the right places. And that can be for a number of reasons. In developed nations like the United States, the food waste happens more often on the consumer side. So if you think about restaurants, grocery stores, us as consumers, individuals who are consuming it, food being wasted at home, that's where it happens most often. In developing nations, the food that is being wasted actually happens more on the production side because they're not able to logistically get the food from farms to urban settings in a way that protects the integrity of the food. So whether it's a matter of packaging so that the food doesn't get bruised, or if it's a matter of refrigeration, there's lots of logistics problems that can happen there. And so it's actually costing the world quite a bit of money. It's around $285 billion that food waste takes on the economy. And again, greenhouse gases are emitted among landfills. Food waste is one of the single highest categories of waste in municipal solid waste that is going to landfills. And so it's really a very, very large problem. Again, it's taking up a lot of space to be able to produce food, especially if a third of it is being wasted. Water that goes into watering plants and our food is being wasted when that food is wasted. And transportation back and forth from farms to people is really very taxing on this planet. So I love this image and this sentiment because just because you're trash doesn't mean you can't do great things. It's called garbage can, not garbage cannot. And I love this because it really, in a very quick sort of snapshot, highlights the whole notion of one man's trash is another man's treasure. And really waste is only waste if we waste it. And so there are things that we can do. The United States EPA, as well as the United Nations, have food waste hierarchies with what we should do with our food waste. And the number one sort of activity that is involved in these pyramids, these hierarchies, is to prevent and reduce food waste from happening at all. So that can translate to lean operations, that can translate to making sure that we're getting it to the right people, that can be making sure that we're not overly purchasing food that goes bad in our fridge, or making sure that we're taking our leftovers from a restaurant and not just having it be dumped, or ordering the right amount of food to begin with so that we don't have leftovers at all. And my sort of big area of focus is, should this be the priority? Because there's other things. There's feeding hungry people, feeding animals, industrial uses, composting, and ultimately landfilling is the last resort. But in my mind, if food can be grown sustainably, so whether it's through aquaponics or urban gardening, vertical farming, there's a lot of innovative agricultural techniques that use resources more efficiently than our traditional agricultural methods. And so if we're able to produce food sustainably, then shouldn't we continue to do so? And sort of the notion that preventing or reducing food waste, it's a bit of a complicated thing because it's sort of like zero waste doesn't actually mean that waste doesn't occur at all. It means that it's being used efficiently in a circular fashion back into the economy. And so food is a natural, renewable, if done sustainably, resource. And so food waste is an abundant, natural, and renewable resource that can be put back into the economy and used. And so that's ultimately what I'm wanting to talk about here, because food waste is a reality, and there are different terminology sort of differences between food loss and food waste. And really the main difference between those two terms have to do with whether the material is edible or not, whether it's contaminated. So when you think about avocado pits, that's actually not something that we can consume and get nutrients from, but there is still valuable material in that pit. Same with coffee grounds. Now we can eat those, but we tend to not. Same with watermelon rinds. Those can be pickled and used. Garlic skins can be used in food stock. Vegetable stock and chicken stock and different broths and things. And so like there is a lot of confusion in the terms. And so really what I want to talk about here is that regardless of whether food is wasted and it's edible or whatever, it can be used as a resource, because there's still calories and nutrients and energy in that material, in that organic material. Because I always like to use the example of chips at a restaurant, or bread at a restaurant that's put on the table. I know we haven't been able to do that in a while, but things are opening up back up now. And those chips that are sat in the middle of the table, they're edible, and but sometimes you're not sure if they have been contaminated or not. And so the server at the end of the night will take those and dump them. And that's that's legitimate concern because of, you don't know if somebody's, put their hands in it and then didn't eat it or whatever, but that is still edible. And so to me, it's sort of irrelevant to differentiate between whether something is edible or contaminated or whatever, because there can be different uses for that. If it ends up in the trash, then it ends up in the trash. It almost doesn't matter if it was edible or not, or contaminated or not, because it's being thrown away, it's being wasted. And so what we can do here is have a more circular sort of use of these nutrients and this energy. And so rather than having food waste go directly into the trash and directly into a landfill, there are things that can be done using that food waste as a material. And so I want to just sort of go through real quick the different types of things that can be used or that can be done with food waste. So food waste can be used as animal feed. We're just kind of going to go down the hierarchy a little bit to chat about the different types of applications. If you see on the top right here, this is a pig farm outside of Las Vegas. Some years back, there was a pig farm, and all of the leftovers from the casinos on the Strip in Las Vegas was collected and then sent to this pig farm to be able to be used as feed, which was great because that way it's not being wasted. All of the big buffets and things, there's a lot of food that gets wasted there. And so this is a great way to use it. And they would heat it up to make sure that, to get rid of any kind of pathogens or anything, contaminants that they could have come from that. And then they feed it to the pigs. So that's great because then that's a source of food for us. What you'll see down at the bottom right here are a little bug called black soldier fly larvae. And they are very, very hungry consumers of food waste. They are often, you can see them in compost piles outdoors. Whether you want them to show up or not, they will show up because they love food waste. And so if you see these in a compost pile, please leave them because they are doing their job and helping to turn that food waste into really nutrient-rich, valuable fertilizer and soil amendment. And on the left here, I don't know if anybody recognizes this bug right here. It is a mealworm. They are mealworms. And the EU actually earlier this year recently approved mealworms for human consumption and is strongly encouraging people to eat mealworms as a food source because they are very healthy and nutritious. They require hardly any land or water resources to be able to live. I actually have systems of mealworms in my house. I grow them and eat them, and I also use them sort of experimentally because they have an enzyme that breaks down styrofoam as well, which is pretty fascinating. But it's important to keep those separate because you don't want to be potentially eating styrofoam. So that's sort of a side note. But Purina also has recently, in the last year, has announced that they are using insects in their animal food, in some of their lines of animal food. And so there's lots of things that we can do here with food waste and using it as animal feed. Another thing that can be done, and really something that I think has tremendous business opportunities, is using food waste as feedstock. So if you'll see at the top left here, that's a fake leather material that is actually made from pineapple leaves. And so it looks very similar. It has similar properties and feelings and textures. So that's a really cool way to be able to use something that normally would have just gone into the trash or sort of reincorporated into the soil. You can actually use that as a in supply chains and as a manufacturing feedstock for different products. The middle picture here is fiber that is made from orange peels, and so that's a pretty awesome use of the cellulose that's in that is in orange peels to be able to use it for fiber and fabric. And then down at the bottom left here is they're cups made from coffee grounds. And so there's lots of different sort of applications. This is really just a couple of examples. There are many, many other things that can be done with food waste. And it's really a tremendous way to be able to think about different resources for manufacturing. We can make plastic water bottles and plastic stuff and recycle them. Some of them we can't. And people can use them over and over again, but at the end of the day, at some point, they're going to end up either in a landfill or in the ocean, and it's not going to be, it's not a material that breaks down well and is reincorporated back into the into our planet. And so we have other things to be able to use as feedstock, and we haven't in the past taken advantage of that. And so I think it's exciting that more businesses are sort of seeing the value in this, because not only is it a way to be able to produce a renewable, sustainable, and biodegradable product, but it's something that actually is much cheaper for them to do, because this is something that normally wouldn't, that either is free or that is costing them actually to discard. So food waste as compost is another really great option. And I'm actually going to talk about that more in detail a little bit later. But compost is a really great soil amendment. It's a very nutrient-rich fertilizer that can be used to grow more food. So it's a very sustainable, circular thing to be able to do, to take food that is not eaten and putting it back into the environment to be able to grow more food. So that's a great system. We'll talk about that more in a little bit. But food waste can also be used for energy. So I don't know if this group is familiar with the term anaerobic digestion, but there are facilities that are very, very large and are very expensive to have those facilities. And anaerobic digestion is basically taking food waste or sometimes other materials, but basically it breaks down in a way that doesn't have oxygen, and so it releases methane. But that methane is then captured and used as energy. And so this is another way that food waste can be used by different businesses and as a business opportunity. But it can be very expensive to create and to build these types of facilities. And at the end of it, it's still methane that is being released and burned, and so it's something that needs to be considered as how sustainable that really is. And so there are many options. There's lots of things that we can do with food waste, and but unfortunately, sustainability has sort of gotten a reputation as being synonymous with expensive, and it can be. So in the case of anaerobic digestion, or like sometimes when we used to talk about solar energy is now becoming much less expensive than it used to be. But some of these sustainable options are much more expensive. If you look at the cost of plastic, the reason why it's still being used so much is because it's extremely cheap. It's cheaper to use virgin plastic than it is to use recycled plastic in many cases, or alternative renewable sources. And so we tend to fall onto, okay, whatever is the cheapest as businesses, whatever is the cheapest is what we're going to go with. But we just can't do that anymore. And firms are learning that and realizing that they have a responsibility to society to be able to do their business better and to manufacture their products and their packaging in a better, more responsible, more sustainable way. And so what's really feasible for businesses to do in terms of the types of practices that they can do for their food waste? Composting service, that's something that is very popular. Actually, Brandy just showed me a box of a compost service called Compost Now, that is a local operation here in Atlanta that will pick up your compost and do the composting activities for you so that you don't have to do that. Many people live in apartments or townhouses that don't have backyards. You can't have your own backyard compost system. And so this offers a great service to be able to sort of deal with your own food waste, or that businesses can deal with their food waste on a larger scale through these services. And I don't mean to, to discourage people from using those services. I think that they're great, but at the same time, I encourage you all to stretch your thinking on this, because does this really solve the problem? Are these types of services really a great use of resources? Because at the end of the day, it's still transporting a lot of food waste around and moving it around. And the thing is that many businesses and also us as consumers, we pay for trash pickup, we pay for waste disposal. And so we're paying for our waste to be taken away from us, either to a landfill or a composting facility. There's actually no centralized composting facility within the city, within 285 in the city of Atlanta. Compost Now, as well as other compost services, they're all located outside of the city, quite a number of miles away. And so there's still a lot of transport back and forth there. And so we're paying to have this waste taken away from us. And, that service also will bring you fresh compost back to you, but that's a service that is a paid for service. And businesses that get their waste removed often are also paying for fertilizer to be brought onto their site for landscaping purposes. And so it's really a double price that we're paying for our waste to be taken away from us, as well as to be brought back on as fertilizer. And so it's not really the best use of resources. It's not, in my opinion, it is not the best option. And again, these are just maps to show centralized composting sort of options. This is in Georgia. This is a visual courtesy of Drawdown, Georgia. And actually, it doesn't include Compost Now's facility, which is located on the west side of Atlanta, but is not within the perimeter. Alternatively, community gardens, and this is actually a very limited representation of community gardens that are in the city of Atlanta. It's only just a few. I just typed in community gardens in Google Maps, and this is what showed up. But this is a very small number of community gardens that actually exist in the city. I'm located in Decatur. This map does not show the several locations of the Wild Center, which has many different community gardens located around Decatur, as well as Atlanta. And there are many more community gardens than there are centralized composting facilities. And so I just wanted to bring that to everyone's attention, that there are many more options for smaller scale. And the problem is that actually a lot of people are concerned with, oh, well, I can't do this in my backyard. I don't have, I'm in an apartment complex. I don't have the ability to have my own composting system. So I use a community garden that's about a block away. And that's what's really nice about community gardens, is that you don't have to know how to do all of the things with composting. It's complicated to know, what's the right temperature? How much space do I need? How often do I have to turn it? And actually, Lewis, I don't know if we can put up the other poll to see. I'm very curious how familiar people are with composting. Because I'm talking about that in a way, I want to make sure that I don't talk about it in a way that is at a level that is not well received by the audience. I want to make sure that I don't sort of talk about it in terms that's not familiar if people are not really aware of what composting means. So it looks like, okay, so folks know what it is or compost themselves. Okay, so it looks like nobody doesn't know what it is, but just real quick, composting is basically when organic material biodegrades in a way that it requires a certain amount of temperature, aeration, temperature, moisture, and the right amount of materials. And so there's nitrogen materials and carbon materials. Nitrogen materials are things like food waste that are rich in nitrogen. And in order for compost to work, it has to have a balance of nitrogen materials and carbon materials. Carbon materials include things like shredded paper, dried leaves, wood chips, sawdust, things like that. And without the right balance of these types of materials, as well as aeration and moisture and time, things won't break down quite the way that they're supposed to. And so, it can be overwhelming to learn what's the right, mix and balance of all of these things. It can be really overwhelming, just like all of these other types of sustainability issues. And so rather than trying to figure out or having to, educate yourself and figure out all of the things of how composting works and what can you do with your own system, take advantage of community gardens, because they are a great resource. And oh, was there more? Okay, on the poll here. It's a great resource to be able to sort of take advantage of people who do know about this within your own community. It's a great way to meet people. Honestly, it's especially during these times, it's a really nice way to meet other people and to sort of get more involved with your community. And so if you don't have a community garden near you, then consider starting one and sort of, talking to your neighbors and seeing, how that can get going, and where it can be located and things like that. And I'm happy to sort of chat offline and sort of talk and guide you through what sort of things are needed in terms of the space requirements, the labor requirements, the materials, and all of that. Permitting can be in question, and so I'm happy to help walk you through that if you have questions about that and want to get that going in your area. So what I'm a big proponent of and a big advocate of is decentralizing activities. And so certain things cannot be decentralized, but things like composting absolutely can. And so things like schools, whether it's a K through 12 school or a university, what if every school had a compost facility on site in addition to a community garden, because that's also a great, they sort of tend to go hand in hand. But that's a great way to be able to grow healthy lunches in an educational way to get students involved in doing things and learning how they're, how their waste makes an impact. It's a great educational tool. My school, Georgia State University, currently we do centralized composting, where we send all of the dining hall food waste out to a facility that's located in Athens, and they really are trying to get away from that. And so actually I got we're starting a project where we're building an on-site composting system actually at the Georgia State Stadium. It's formerly the Turner Field, which is downtown, and there's a rooftop garden at the top of that stadium, and we're going to be building some compost systems to be paired with that, because the catering services at the school and through the stadium are located actually on the floor directly below that community that rooftop garden. And so we're going to have them take all of their food, separate all their food waste, and just bring it up a floor and compost it so that we can produce our own fertilizer for the community garden. And so and if that the hope is that we can sort of have that as a pilot and then expand it out towards other areas of campus. And a lot of people think, oh, well, a lot of businesses think that if they don't have the reason they do centralized composting is because they have just a massive amount, and what are they going to do with this massive amount? And one little backyard composting system isn't going to work for the entirety of the campus, but it might work for a building. And so if we just had a lot of different composting sort of systems scattered throughout the city, then it could actually handle the volume if we just break it up and make it on a smaller scale. There's other types of options rather than backyard systems. There's something called in-vessel composting, which is what you see at the bottom right picture here. That's an example of an in-vessel composter where it's a closed system, and it operates usually in a corkscrew method, and so it pushes the food waste. It gradually sort of moves the food waste through, and so you're left. You basically put food waste on one side, food waste as well as carbon materials like leaves and things, and then at the other side is fertilizer that can be ready to use. And so if every school had a compost system, if every apartment complex had a compost system, if every shopping center had a compost system, these are ways that we can actually tackle food waste at a very feasible level for very, an economically feasible level. It doesn't have to be a really expensive thing. And then we don't have to be transporting things back and forth and back and forth. And we have been successful in getting recycling as a norm in most businesses. And so, if we can get recycling to be a norm, why not just have a compost system where all, in the back of a business where all the dumpsters are? To me, it seems like a sort of a no-brainer kind of thing, and something that every business should be doing. And so again, I encourage you all to leverage your communities do something. The picture on the bottom left here, that's a picture of the community garden that I use. We have a tumbler system and then a 3-bin system as well. And again, I'm happy to talk about this with you all more in detail. I realize I'm coming short on time and I would like to have some discussions with you guys. So I just encourage you to have, to think locally for global impact, because there are really very impactful things that we can do, not only in our own lives, our own personal lives, but in our professional lives, and asking the businesses that we are involved with, whether it's your apartment complex, whether it's your place of work, whether it's the place where you worship, the place where you shop, anywhere, ask them what they're doing to address food waste, because there are options that exist out there. And if they don't know that people are thinking about this and that this is a priority, then they might not look into it. But the more we ask about it and keep it as something top of mind for businesses, then the more that we can actually make some changes and make these things happen. Because, the ripple effect, I fully believe in the ripple effect and think that, the things that we do can make a difference. And so I'd love to talk with you guys, and I'm going to stop sharing my screen here because I really want to have some discussions here and see what you guys think about this. And if this is something that are you totally overwhelmed by all of this stuff, or is it something that you're excited about? Is it something, that you're discouraged about? I would love to hear from the people here.